You're listening to the Believe in Giants podcast with two-time Super Bowl winner Carl Banks and the voice of the Giants, Bob Papa.
And we welcome you to another edition of Believe in Giants, presented by FanDuel. Bob Papa, two-time Super Bowl champion Carl Banks, and the 2026 NFL Draft is in the rearview mirror. The New York Giants addressed some needs. They drafted outside of their need in taking Arvell Reese. I guess I phrased that improperly because you can never have enough good football players.
Yeah.
So we'll leave it at that. But Carl, as they've finished up with this draft, your overall take of what we saw, because we did the live pod after the first two picks in round number one. So we haven't had a chance to talk about Colton Hood, who a lot of people had in many mock drafts going late in round one. The Giants get him early in round two. Then they trade a bunch of assets to get back into round number three because they didn't have a third-round pick. Take a big, strong, sturdy wide receiver in Malachi Fields, and then defensive line, Bobby James Travis, offensive line, J.C. Davis late in the draft, and an intriguing prospect at a BYU linebacker, Jack Kelly, who a lot of scouts around the league really like. But your sort of take on what we've seen out of the Giants?
I think you see a organization that is just getting good players, Bob. They're fitting a profile. They want to be a physical team. You can see the type of players. They want to be aggressive on defense. But, you know, what I take out of it when I look at these players and they come into the roster, you know, I always use the phrase, you know, no scholarships, right? Well, the era of scholarships, again, is over, because when you look at the positions that they drafted that currently have players, like Colton Hood in the cornerback room is just basically saying to everybody, yeah, you guys get a chance to prove yourself, but we just added another player to the room because we're not going to wait on you in case you decide you just want to ease into this. There's going to be competition. Offensive linemen now all of a sudden at the guard position, whereas you say, okay, well, you know, Greg Van Roten and Evan Neal will have a shot, which they will, but they just put another guy in the room who says the cream's going to rise to the top. So I like what they're doing, and I also like the big kid they got from Auburn. You know, he's a space eater, and he's a big, strong kid. Obviously, he's got, you know, work to do. And then the other intriguing one for me is Malachi Fields, right? And if we were to sit back and just, because the highlights always put forth the best of what these kids do, which they should. That's why they call them highlights. You say, wow, he can be something, you know, a different type of player for this offense. And then I stumble upon, and if you guys are out there, try to find Steve Smith's YouTube channel, 89 something, I forget the name of it, but he gives you a really good breakdown of Malachi Fields, and it's the good and the things he has to work on. I don't want to say bad, right? You know, Steve keeps it really, really blunt and honest. But you know, the first thing he said, you can program this kid's success right away with like a push slant. He calls it a push off slant, a go ball, jump ball. You know, those are things he can be successful at right away. Go ball, jump ball, push slants, and something else he said. And then he said, but then as they're having success with those, I think it was 3 different routes that this kid could be really good at right away. And then he said the other things he's going to have to work on. He talks about the route tree. And, you know, he talks a little bit about the kid's conditioning, which obviously when you get to the pro level, you're going to, you know, and you get into a program, if you plan on contributing, they're going to make sure that you are in pro shape. So that's not a big concern for me. But I like the fact that Steve Smith gave us what he can contribute right now for Jackson Dart and things he's got to continue to work on. Kelly, again, you see a lot of highlights of this kid. Um, and he looks really good. However, he was selected where he was for a reason. We're going to find out why that is, right? A lot of scouts are high on him. Obviously, he has upside. He played against some good tackles um, in the Big 12, 2 win in the first round. He had sacks against those guys. But there's a reason why um, everyone decided that they were
Yeah,
passed
sixth
as
round
far as
was his level.
right. So there's something there, but he played against good competition. He'll probably have a chip on his shoulder. And again, there's a room where you're going to have to make room for more talent. That's all they're saying. We're putting talent in the room. We're going to be aggressive, and we're getting after it. So I love that.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about some of the names that they've rolled out at linebacker the last couple of years, and some of it, unfortunately due to injury, right? Like Micah McFadden, who was not a first or second round pick, really developed into a very good football player. He got better and better every year, and he became a starter. And then last year in week 1 against Washington, he goes down. And it was like a revolving door of people on the inside of who's going to play, signing guys off the street, whatever they were doing. And, they've added depth to their linebacking room with a kid like Kelly. He's got to make the team. But you also have to think about the trickle-down effect. You need people to play special teams. And, and also McFadden with the drafting of Arvell Reese. I mean, this is what I love about Harbaugh. And, no disrespect to Dabes, who was here beforehand, but a lot of times in his effort to be coy, he kind of, was very vague about specific things, right? Which led to questions and everything else. Like Harbaugh came in and just said, no, Arvell Reese is going to line up next to Tremaine Edmonds as an inside backer. And we got a plan for him. And our defensive coordinator is going to have multiple ways to use all these parts. But he's going to line up an inside off-ball linebacker next to Tremaine Edmonds. Edmonds is going to teach him that position and teach him the nuances of playing in the NFL, helping him get lined up, helping him see things, coaching him while playing. And the same thing with Mawanoa. It wasn't like, well, he's going to compete. We're going to use him at the multiple tackle spots. We're going to. It's like, no, he's the right guard. Like, I don't think the Giants are re-signing Van Roten based on what they did in the draft and based on players that they still have under contract under rookie deals. My sense is that the Giants are not even going to bring Van Roten back at this point. So I like the fact that, going back to what you said about Kelly, add more competition to each room. Strengthen your special teams, create better talent depth on your roster. Now the kid's got to earn a spot, but I like the level of talent that they're bringing in to compete for a spot.
Well, yeah, it's about the competition, but it's also it's about every phase of football, right? So Micah McFadden will have a spot on the Giants team. He will be, I don't know if he'll be a rotational player at linebacker, but he's there, right? But when you look at the other areas that John Harbaugh has been really good at and where he really cut his teeth, it's similar to Bill Belichick. It's special teams. He was a special teams coach, right? He takes special teams seriously. So yes, there's going to be competition in the room, but there's also going to be competition for special teams. You're going to get your best players that play special teams as well. And so when you have a feel-good story like Darius Moore-South, right? He's limited, he was all they had, and you have to live with it, and he was getting better every week. Well, now Darius Moore-South, if you're going to make it, you're going to be more it's going to be more mandatory that you become a very, very good special teams player and continue to develop because you just went back a notch in the linebacker depth chart. You're going to have to compete there, and you got game experience, but you better be lights out on special teams because now there's a Kelly there. Now there's more kids that are just coming in, and Micah McFadden is going to be a contributor on special teams as well. So if you're not a starter, you're a special teams player at that position anyway, and at the cornerback position. If you're not a starter, plan on being a special teams player.
Yeah, even at the safety position. I mean, I was talking with a guy who plays in the NFL this past season, and he's been a starter in the league for a while, but he also took a lot of, I think, going into his 8th year or whatever, but he took a lot of pride in his special teams. And he says to me, he goes, Pop, he goes, this Belton guy, he goes, every week I would look at the stats, and I was right near the league lead in special teams tackles, but this Belton guy was always moving just a little ahead of me. And we all like Dane Belton. Great kid. We wish him nothing but the best. But that's a perfect example, right? He was a spot starter due to injury and everything else. He earned more playing time, but he never lost his core, which was, hey, even if I'm starting, I got to excel on special teams, which is one of the reasons why he wound up signing with the Jets, is because he brings that element to the dance.
Yep. And, you know, he was that guy, right? He knew the assignment. He had to go make plays. Whatever he didn't do as a starter, as a safety, he took it all to special teams. And, you know, he had great practices against the Jets in the summertime. So the Jets knew exactly who he was. So I'm super happy for him. But listen, man, this, again, the scholarship era is done. I also want to address something really, we talked about it when it first happened, you know, the Micah Parsons podcast, and you had Malik Nabers, who had, you know, his comments on the draft choice. And it has since been addressed internally and openly internally, where the coach said he wants to know what we're going to do with Harbaugh Reese. So I sat him down and I showed him, right? And that part of the discourse where people are still trying to make it an issue, but I like the fact that, number one, you have a coach who says, hey, look, he spoke his mind, and now I'm going to, he didn't say it in these words, but I'm going to educate him on team building and how this guy fits into what we do and how it helps. That I love about Harbaugh, but I also think that benefits Malik Nabers. Like, Malik can ask a question, you know, he's comfortable in that environment, but also you get an opportunity to be educated now. Now you get a chance to see how team building is done, contrary to what, you know, is now coming out. They just leave it as if he's questioning, and they never added the fact that he and the coach actually sat and the coach explained to him how this guy is going to be used. And I think that's another benefit of having a guy like Coach Harbaugh, who's just like you said, not being coach speak, not being cute about it. Hey, he talked about it. He said, hey, I had him in and we talked about it, and I showed him exactly how we're going to use him. And that's, you know, that's as good as you can get from a coach in terms of educating a player and addressing a player's, you know, concerns.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's another example of Harbaugh and what you're paying for as far as his experience. He didn't say anything like, hey, no, I want my guys to speak up. I want to hear what my players have to say. But here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to invite you in anytime you want to come in. Let's sit down, and I'm going to explain to you all the ways that we're going to use them. Now, a lot of the guys that cover the team did report on this, right? Malik was there to greet the 2 first-round draft picks when they came in. He sat down with Harbaugh, and instead of this being a story that will linger through the rest of the spring and into veteran minicamp, John Harbaugh took it on with a smile. Who knows what happened behind the scenes, right? They sat
Mhm.
down, talked with Malik, didn't embarrass the player in any way, shape, or form. In fact, encouraged. Hey, I love when guys speak up, and everybody
Mhm.
has thoughts. Everybody has opinions. That's
Sure.
fine. He did it with a smile, yet he also sent a message to the entire team that, okay, you guys can have your thoughts or whatever else. My door is always open. But Harbaugh then changed the narrative completely and turned what could be a spring negative into a positive. There's Malik greeting the first two picks.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's on board. Everybody understands what's going on. On to the next day's practice. I mean, speaking of open door policy, you shared with us before we started taping this. You and I were both in the facility yesterday. He really does have an open door policy, doesn't he?
Well, he does. I was I was walking down the hall and I poked my head around the corner. They were, doing a meeting, um, a defensive meeting, and he says, "Come in, sit down, and you're welcome to sit in on this." And I just was like, "No, you guys go ahead. I had something to do anyway in the building because I was going." But um, I think there's a high level of respect for um curiosity, if you will. But I mean, he's not open door. We're actually working with him during the year. Obviously, we do our Coach Harbaugh report and all of that stuff. So, but if I have questions, legitimate football questions, I'm sure he'd be more than happy to answer those for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that he's really drawn a straight line as far as how he's going to run his program, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I think we saw in the aftermath of the Reese pick and Mauanoa just taking it head on. The Nabers situation, he turned hey, look, you and I were a little annoyed on draft night
Mm-hmm.
when we did our live thing because fans were like, oh, Malik's not happy with the picks. And, you and I both
Mm-hmm.
said, hey, look, these guys have spent countless hours studying these prospects and everything else.
Yeah.
Like, probably should just pipe down a little bit. And then just left it at that. But here's Harbaugh taking something that, people want to make a big issue out of, and he diffused it, but he diffused it with information for this,
Yeah.
for the player. He didn't just say he needs to pipe down. He
Right.
didn't do any of that.
And here's the thing, Malik Nabers is now smarter as a result of that, right? So if he doesn't address that or have a conversation with the coach, he probably doesn't understand how the dynamic of a player like Alvaro Reese helps the team, helps the defense, and ultimately helps him as an offensive player. So I think the beautiful part about Coach Harbaugh in that interaction is he made the player smarter. He made um, Malik Nabers understand a little bit more about the team building aspect and why a player like that really helps the team, which ultimately helps him. It's not a matter of we got one of these guys already. He can show you, hey, Malik, this is what we can do with a guy like this and a guy like Carter and a guy like Burns and a guy like Thibodeau and a guy like Edmonds. This is what we are capable of doing, which is very difficult for an offense to deal with. And so I'm happy that that relationship and that discourse happened the way it did.
Yeah, I mean it's pretty cool to see, and I think the messaging too is just like, okay, I'm the head coach. These are the decisions. You're more than welcome to engage in conversations with me about what we're doing, and I'll take your thoughts under advisement, right? But at the end of the day, kind of the bottom line is going to stop with me. Just being in the building yesterday, I got to tell you a funny story. So last year before the Giants played the Niners, I was talking to Jason Pinnock on the field, and, he really didn't want to leave. He loved being a New York Giant.
Yeah.
And just chatting with him on the field before the game, he was like, yeah, because his role was not, the Giants, he was a centerpiece player, and he had a
Mhm.
role with the Niners, and they used him however they used him.
Mhm.
And then when I saw that he re-signed, so yesterday I'm walking down the hallway because I had to go to the equipment area, and walking through the the weight room, and he was kind of like right near the window. So we gave he gives me a fist pump through the window, and then I
Mhm.
see him in the makeshift cafeteria. And because they're redoing the Giants facility, it's a 2-year project. They're
Mhm.
really upgrading everything. So they've set up a temporary cafeteria for now.
Mhm.
And I'm walking down there to grab a cup of coffee, and he was in there at lunchtime, and we had a chance to catch up. And he was just beaming. He's like, I'm
Yeah.
so happy to be back here. I'm so happy. He really seems to like the new defensive coordinator.
Mhm.
Man, it's cool to see guys happy to be in the building and be part of what I think John Harbaugh is going to put together.
Yeah, that's the other part. When you've got guys, and I said this early on, that 99% of these players will embrace all of the things that this new regime is about because they want to learn, they want to know. They talk about wanting to win so badly, and they legitimately and honestly want to learn how to do that. So when you see that a guy like Pinnock is embracing it, and you see, I was there and I see all the guys. Look, this is something they want. They want that success. They want to feel like they're good football players on a good football team, and you know they got guys in the building that want to be there, and that's all that matters. And they're adding more pieces. They're creating competition. They're creating a higher level talent base. And so when you see the additions and you see where they're going with this type of players that they're adding, all the way down to the kickers, right? They are legitimately leaving no stone unturned. And special teams, you can say, were not an issue, but they were an issue because you couldn't find a kicker last year, right? Their coverage teams were good. They had a couple bad stretches, but coverage and return teams were not bad. They had bad games though, and they normally coincided with a loss when you needed them. But the kicking situation just never. The kicking situation literally cost you games. So they are literally addressing every phase of this team.
And I don't want to spend too much time on this, but just being around and kind of getting a feel on the Monday after the draft, off-season programs in full swing, and everybody's got a little pep in their step, and trying to do what they need to do to get ready. I really do think that the Dexter Lawrence trade, not only did they get the 10th overall pick, but I think from a tone setter with this new regime, I just feel like it was the best for both worlds, both best for both sides, because what Harbaugh is doing right now, and you got that sense, I got
Mhm.
that sense of this energy and this positivity. If you had one of your marquee players not participating, and every time there's a media session, and is there going to be a holdout in camp or whatever, it's just not the way you want to start a new
Mhm.
program.
Mhm.
And I feel like, and this is not a knock on the player, and business is business. And I understand all that stuff. But from
Mhm.
a tempo mindset, I think everybody won in this situation, because I think now there's a big cloud that's not hanging over this, because it's going to be the white elephant in the room, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it would have been
Well,
lingering every time there was a media
yeah,
avail. Where
and
do
I
we stand
think
on the contract?
I think the best way to put it is that it's a culture reset for both, right? You reset the culture of your current player base and locker room. He gets to go to a different culture and kind of reset where he wants to be in his football life. And so listen, the thing that matters right now is what goes on in that building in Quest and the energy that's in that building. And so they have they've got to focus, and I'm happy about that.
Yeah, and I think it also, when you mention a reset, I think it allows a leadership reset in the sense
Yeah,
that
it's part of the culture.
um,
Yep.
he's been a captain. He's been was one of the most senior membered Giants. Okereke had been there for a bit. And I think now what you do is it's almost like you know who some of the leaders are, but let's throw the balls up in the air. And as we go through
Hmm.
this off-season program and we get to training camp, let's see where the leadership
Yeah.
core develops.
Sure.
And it's all new.
Hmm.
I like new.
And then I guess the last part that it's becoming comical now is like people who didn't get their draft boards. I mean, from a fan base, didn't have their draft board blessed with the pick that they wanted. Is now there's a big debate on what Alvaro Reese is, what he isn't, while Sonny Styles should have been the pick. And I'm like, you know what, folks? It's a moot point now. He's a Giant. The Giants have a plan for him, and you'll just have to sit back and watch for that plan. You're arguing who was better for what when the Giants got the guy that they wanted for the position that they wanted, and you can say he's not an off ball. He is an off ball. He was projected this. Guess what? He's going to be exactly where the Giants want him. So that's the end of the argument.
He played more off ball, I think, last year than he played on the edge anyway. And
Yeah,
here's what
doesn't matter.
here's the thing, right? First of all, Matt Patricia is the defensive coordinator, highly respected, NFL concepts. In the research of the players, they spent a lot of time talking with college coaches. They put their board up. They put grades on players. It doesn't matter what your grade on a player was. It doesn't matter what my grade was. It doesn't matter what Daniel Jeremiah's grade was. It doesn't matter what Mel Kiper's. It doesn't matter what Pro Football Focus's grade are. It's what the team puts the grade on. And they had him
Yeah,
graded higher than Sonny Styles. They could have taken either. They took
yeah.
this player because they felt he was a better prospect as a player in the National Football League. So just let it rest. I would encourage all of our viewers out there to go check out my man, Chad Ryder of NFL.com. So Chad has been doing mock drafts for 25 years. He's the guy on NFL.com that has trades in his mock drafts, and he's the guy that does a 3-round mock draft and then a 5-round mock draft, and then the week of the draft, he puts out a 7-round mock draft. He actually got some picks correct in rounds 6 and 7 where he nailed it with the team. But Chad doesn't have an ego. Chad goes about it very analytically, and he looks at the teams. He looks at trades that they made the previous year, moves that they made in free agency, and then he looks at schemes. He looks at coaching staffs, and he tries to marry what the team's philosophies are as he makes this crazy 7-round mock draft. It's hilarious. But anyway, he posted his draft grades yesterday, I think it was, on NFL.com. So he grades the team overall. He grades the team day 1. He grades the team day 2. He grades the team day 3. And I think the worst grade he gave out was a B for all 32 teams. He's like, it's absolutely ridiculous when people are giving D's and F's. How could you possibly do that without these guys? Because sometimes it matters who's the coach, what's the scheme, whatever. The Raiders, the Raiders traded Tyree Wilson yesterday. Well, he was the 7th overall pick in the 23 draft. When Josh McDaniels was the head coach, Ziegler was the general manager. McDaniels got fired. Antonio Pierce was the interim. Antonio Pierce takes over as head coach, becomes the head coach. Tom Telesco comes in as the general manager. They both get blown out. Pete Carroll comes in, new GM. Pete Carroll gets blown out. And now they have yet another new coach in Clint Kubiak. Well, you can't succeed.
Right.
Doesn't matter what way you got drafted.
Right.
So I would encourage everybody to go check out Chad's draft grades. It's sensible. It's logical. Nobody gets worse than a B, because anybody that gives anybody an F or a D or a C minus 3 days after the draft, you're just guessing. You have no clue.
Yeah, unless you drafted some guy that has never played football, undersized, and Rudy or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Anything else?
That's it, man. That's all I got.
Any business we need to share with our audience?
No,
Anything
I'm just
new
here
with
for
Starter?
meetings in Jacksonville. No, we're just plugging along, getting ready for the season,
Wait
getting
a second.
some
You're not in Jackson.
40th anniversary. Yes, I am.
Aren't you north? Aren't you north of?
Well, I flew into Jacksonville. I'm at the Major League Baseball Summit. So, yeah. So my big news is, and it's developing, but our 40th anniversary New York Giants starter collection for '86 is going to be a lot of fun. A lot of classics. Yeah. And we were trying to work with the Mets. I should have called Jay Horowitz, because that was a time in New York City where both the Mets and the Giants were just on fire. The top athletes in all sport was, Strawberry and Gooden and Taylor and Sims and our crew. And, we had the city on lock. And it was some really great moments that, unfortunately, and I get it, the Mets have got their hands full right now with the season not going the way it should. But there were a lot of great moments in '86 between the two teams, and actually the Giants kind of reached out to the Mets and they just didn't respond. And I said, I should call Jay, but I just said, they got their hands full right now, and maybe that part of life is just not that important to them right now. But it's a part of their history, so they should be part, and it's part of New York history too. That was the other part.
I suggest, at least reach out. And here's why I'll say that.
We did it a lot. I mean, listen, I did it. The Giants marketing did it. They just didn't get a reply. And I know I have a great relationship with Jay Horowitz, and I think it's something that they should be a part of, because the Giants want to celebrate that. And, obviously Starter was a part of both of those eras. So, yeah.
I'm not a Mets fan, but I will say this. I know they had the long losing streak, but as I tried to explain to my son and others that would listen, it's April. It's not even May yet. When they ended their 12-game losing streak, they had 138 games left. They could go on a bender in June and July and get right back in it. My 1978 Yankees were 14 games out in July and came back and beat the Red Sox in the one-game playoff. If you have a 12-game losing streak in August and there's only 26 games left to try to dig out of that hole, okay.
Yeah.
But when you get Soto healthy, and they could still have a good year. And again, I'm not even a Met fan, but I'm just looking at numbers and I'm looking at baseball. Yeah. And I'm looking at streaks and slumps and hot spells and everything else. That would be really cool. Anyway, for our audience, this is the 40th anniversary of the 1986 Super Bowl champion Giants. And the Giants are going to be honoring that team during the course of the season. They're going to have some pretty cool stuff during the year, which means we'll get to see those uniforms that you wore a couple more times. So that'll be fun. So when we get more details, we'll share it. But it's going to be a fun year celebrating '86 and really kind of cool with Harbaugh and this new regime. All right, Carl, how do you like to end this?
Tell a friend to tell a friend.
Believe in
Giants.
Giants.